That's a pretty impressive viewfinder, hey? What if I told you that the camera that it belonged to could take some of the highest resolution photos that you've ever seen, and that it was produced over 40 years ago? Well, this is the Mamiya RZ67, and it's one hell of a camera. Let's talk about it. The RZ67 is a line of medium format 6x7 film cameras produced by Mamiya from 1982 to 2004, starting with this, the Pro 1, which I've had the pleasure of shooting with for nearly a year now. So what is 6x7 format? Well, it's shot on a type of film size called 120, and you get 10 images per roll. The format, which in comparison to 35mm film, is almost 2.5 times bigger. So what does this extra size give you more of? Well, you get more resolution, so much more resolution, and detail, and bokeh, and back-breaking weight. I mean, yes, this camera is huge, gigantic even. It's almost funny how large, unwieldy, and unergonomic this beast is. But once you get the scans back from the lab, all the weight concerns and high cost of film and development just vanish because you are greeted with some of the most sublime images that you have ever seen. So I've had plenty of experience shooting 35mm film over the years, but I only got into shooting medium format about a year ago when I bought this RZ67. I had always wanted to try it out, but you know, I had always assumed that the extra size and weight of the camera wouldn't be worth it. And boy, was I wrong. This thing produces some unbelievable images, with more detail and clarity than I'd ever seen before. On each film scan, you can just zoom and zoom and zoom, and the image still looks good. Saying the RZ67 is reminiscent of a traditional 35mm film camera would be a bit of a stretch. It's fairly odd design that if you haven't shot 120 film before, it will definitely take some time to get used to. So, for starters, you compose using this, the big, beautiful viewfinder. And you notice how everything is mirrored? Yeah, so you have to take that into account when composing. It can definitely be a little disorienting at first. But you can always add on this, which is the Prism Finder. And you know, the way that works is pretty simple. You just pop the top off like this, and then slot this on like so. And there you go, Prism Finder attached. So modular system, as you know, which is one of the unique features of this camera. But this thing is really, really heavy, and it adds on to the already huge weight of this camera. It also makes it even bigger. So unless you're shooting this in a studio and you've got a tripod to put this on, I would really avoid doing this, and I would advise against it because it's just not worth the weight. And the mirrored image is a little bit difficult at first to sort of get your head around, but you know, I think once you practice with it a little bit, within a couple of days of using it, it'll become second nature. It's not that hard. So yeah, I probably would avoid, this thing's heavy as hell. I would avoid the Prism Finder, but if you need it, it is an option. And in a studio, it can be really good, especially when you want to shoot sort of more head on, because with the Prism Finder, obviously you're looking down like at waist level. So it can be a little bit difficult to, shoot portraits with it. I mean, in the sense that when you're shooting portraits with it, you're kind of always like aiming up at people rather than sort of at eye level like this, like you would with the Prism Finder. This is through and through a studio camera. Nothing about it is ergonomic, comfortable, or easily transportable. The shape is effectively just a big, heavy rectangle, so taking it with you anywhere can be a bit daunting. But that didn't stop me from taking it with me on my last holiday though. On one hand, you know, yes, this is definitely overkill, but I definitely don't regret bringing this with me on my last trip to Bali. It was one of the best decisions I could have ever made. I brought it with me in this Peak Design small camera cube, which I found to perfectly fit the RZ67 with a 110mm lens and a spare back as well. And I could also attach a Peak Design camera strap to it and use like a big heavy sling to carry the camera around too. And I got some absolutely amazing photos, and I used it on a few shoots while I was over there as well, on a beautiful black sand beach and also at this gorgeous waterfall. And look, let me tell you, at this waterfall, I was definitely the bane of everyone else's existence. While you've got couples trying to take cute photos of themselves in front of the waterfall on their iPhones, I'm parked up with the RZ on a tripod, everyone's staring at me while I take these photos of Rebecca. And look, I definitely 100% won boyfriends of Instagram for this one. But the glares from onlookers were worth it because goddamn, look at that photo. This was shot at 2.8 wide open, and you can see that incredible depth of field that medium format is so well known for, as well as the resolution and the sharpness. So back in Melbourne, I've used this camera for a multitude of things, from shooting my friend's wedding with it to studio portraits and more. And every time I'm just blown away by the incredible images that I get out of the RZ or the RZ. It's kind of like, you know, it's up to you how you pronounce it, I suppose. But you know, the camera, unfortunately, it does have its flaws. It can be a little bit temperamental. This is actually my second RZ67 body, and I'd actually bought another one initially, but it had a bit of a weird sticky shutter, which it worked sometimes, but sometimes it didn't, and it ended up with like ruined rolls of film. And look, with Kodak's increase in prices and the rising cost of development, burning through a roll of film, which can actually cost, you know, if you include the cost of development, nearly $50, can really ruin your day. So, you know, after I had a shoot where, again, this camera here had quite a few sort of sticky shutter issues, I went out and bought a second camera instead, just to be safe. And this one itself, this one here, was actually in much rougher cosmetic shape. But, you know, it was recently serviced, so it was in much better working condition. However, it was missing the little rubber grips at the bottom, as well as the little cover on the film advance lever as well. But I harvested the film advance lever from my broken camera, and Jake, my friend Jake, who also built me the Polaroid camera, which I've got a video on, you can check that out as well. We actually cut out some custom Akiasai black pebble leather and glued it on, as the rubber grips themselves were impossible to replace without having to basically change the entire bottom piece itself, which is not exactly an easy find. But you know, 10 shots though, that's not enough, you say. And look, yes, it is not a lot, but you know, it definitely makes you a lot more deliberate with your photos. Having 10 shots per roll makes the 36 shots on 35mm film seem almost like a digital level of unlimited, but it can actually force you to slow down and really consider your shots, and be careful with composition, and ultimately produce a more considered final image. So one of the coolest features of this camera is, well, actually in the namesake. At least for the older brother, the RB67, the RB stood for Revolving Back, and that feature actually carries along to the RZ67 too. So what is a revolving back? Well, if you flick this switch on the side here to the R position, you can easily go from landscape to portrait orientation just by rotating the back. This allows you to capture any orientation of image without needing to move the camera itself, which makes shooting portraits with the RZ67 an absolute delight. In addition, the lenses for this camera are just unreal. My favorite being this one, the 110mm 2.8, which is like a 55mm full frame equivalent focal length. And it's an excellent multi-purpose lens, which works great for portraits as well as general life capturing too. And it's also the smallest, lightest, and sharpest lens for the system as well. So I've also got this, the 180, and this, the 65mm lens as well. And you know, this is actually an RB lens, but RB lenses do work on the RZ as well. So if you want to find some cheaper lenses, you can actually go for the cheaper RB lenses too. They will work on this camera just fine. However, you know, I find myself gravitating to just using the 110 2.8 the most. It's the lightest, and it's definitely the best lens for the system. It's the most well-renowned for a reason. Yeah, this is the one I definitely use the most. Now the backs themselves, they're actually removable. So with just the bottom here, you just flick this open, pull it off. And you can actually load different film in them, so you can interchange films while shooting. Although personally, I just find that I just have my second back loaded up with another roll of film, and when I'm finished with one back on a shoot, I just pop the other one on. It's much quicker that way to keep shooting, because loading a roll of film into this camera takes about a minute or two. So you could probably get it done even quicker if you were, you know, practiced and experienced. But for me, it's a couple of minutes to do it. So if you're trying to shoot quickly, you definitely want to have backs loaded up with film, so it's a lot easier to just get those shots out and keep shooting. It definitely isn't as quick as a 35mm film camera to reload. The camera focuses a little bit differently to most other cameras too. It actually uses a bellows to focus, which is this thing on the side here, and it uses these little knobs. So when you move it backwards and forwards, you extend the bellows out, and having bellows actually allows this camera to have any lens for the system turns into a macro lens. So you can focus extremely close with any lens on the system because of the bellows. So that's really cool. And the shutter itself, it's a leaf shutter, which means that it can flash sync at any speed up to 1/400th of a second, which is the highest shutter speed that this camera can go to. You do, however, need to plug the flash into the flash sync port. There is a hot shoe, but it's a little bit of a trick, because it needs to be plugged into the PC sync port on the lens for the flash to sync at the same time. Yeah, simply attaching the flash onto the hot shoe will not work. I use one of these little PC sync port adapters. There was like $15 off Amazon, and it basically works really well. You plug it onto the hot shoe plug a PC sync port into one end of the adapter and the other one into the lens. And then you can attach any flash, any remote trigger, anything you want, and it works wonders. So I've used it both in a studio with a little flash trigger, and I've also used it with my little Fujifilm EFX20 flash for what I consider to be the biggest and most unwieldy and impractical point and shoot camera ever. But it does create some really cool results with that too. So yeah, I really like that as well. And look, you know, while the weight is definitely heavy, the RZ67 provides you with a shooting experience and results that are unparalleled and unmatched, except maybe by modern high-resolution medium format digital cameras, which cost substantially more than the RZ67 does. And you know, they definitely don't have a shutter sound as sexy as this. I paid all up about 1900 AUD for this RZ67 and 110mm lens, but I spent an additional $1,000 on the other body, lenses and the Prism. And look, you know what? I know I could have probably bought these a few years ago for probably half of that, but you know, it is what it is. I'm still satisfied with my purchase, and I believe the results that you can get out of the RZ67 are well worth the steep asking price and film development costs. Have you tried out the RZ67? Do you have another favorite medium format film camera? So I know the Pentax 6.7 is another option that is very popular, and it's more of a traditional SLR style camera, but I really enjoy the modularity that the RZ67 offers, and it's really hard to beat the Revolving Back. Anyway, that's all for today. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more of this kind of content. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye.